Okay, everyone. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome. My name is Drew Asbury. I'm the horticulturist and volunteer manager here at Hillwood. And welcome to our first day of horticulture of 2022. Today's program is a two-part series. So today is just day one of presentations. And then please mark your calendar for March 7th for day two of presentations. We're super excited to have you here with us today. Our program is a Zoom webinar, which means you can sit back, get comfortable. Your camera and microphone are turned off today. But of course, as usual, we would love to hear from you. So please go ahead and use that Q&A module to ask questions throughout the program. And then at the end of each presentation, we'll pause, answer those questions before we start the next presentation. I'd love to just take a very short moment to thank all of Hillwood volunteers for all of your continued support, especially to us folks over here in horticulture. Hillwood would not be the organization we are today without all of your support. So for that, I say thank you. And we do have a pretty big lineup of speakers today. I'm going to start things off speaking about caterpillars and the role they play in a healthy ecosystem. And then we're going to turn the controls over to Andrew Biedenball, our tropical plant and orchid specialist, who's going to teach us about the lure, history, and cultivation of the vanilla orchid. And then unfortunately, Vera this morning is not able to join us for her Azaleas at Hillwood presentation, which has just glorious photos of the days of Marjorie Post, as well as photos of today's collections. She will be presenting on March 7th, so just stay tuned for that. And then we'll end our day. Our third presentation will be by our Director of Horticulture, Jessica Bonilla, speaking on all of the environmental and sustainability initiatives that are currently underway across the Hillwood campus. So again, I welcome you. We're gonna have a fun morning this morning, so sit back, refill the coffee, and let's just get started. Thanks. So again, gardening for caterpillars is how we're gonna start off. And we're gonna talk a lot about caterpillars today, folks, and talk a little bit about butterflies and all of that. We're going to start off here with the good old poster child of the caterpillar and butterfly world. This is the monarch caterpillar. On the right, we can see that adult monarch in the cutting garden at Hillwood. And then on the left, we'll see the larval stage or the caterpillar stage of the monarch. Here munching away on some swamp milkweed, and this is actually in my own backyard this past summer. And I'm sure by now we've all heard, the fascinating story of the monarch's life cycle and its annual migration. But today we're going to look at how adult monarchs, the butterfly stage, are generalist feeders, right? They float around the garden sipping nectar from all sorts of flowering plants. But the larval stage can only eat one thing, and that's a small handful of native species of milkweed or Asclepias. This particular one's the swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata, which is one of their preferred Asclepias species to munch away on. We're going to talk a lot about plants, of course. But the bottom line of the story today is that monarchs are specialists during at least one part of their life cycle, and that is during their larval stage. They can only eat and grow on by eating our native milkweeds, right? So if in our landscapes we don't have native milkweeds, we won't have monarchs, okay? So, but today we're gonna look at caterpillars from a slightly different angle, and that is their importance for birds in our landscape, and in particular baby birds. And this presentation could have just as easily been titled Gardening for Baby Birds, because what we're learning is that the vast majority, and some 96%, of North American terrestrial birds feed their young insects, right? That baby birds don't eat seeds and fruits and nuts and such. They eat insects, and in most cases, those insects are caterpillars, followed closely by adult moths, okay? So Lepidoptera are all the same little guys there, okay? So for example, a pair of Carolina chickadees require anywhere from 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to successfully raise just one brood of young, right? So a typical nesting period lasts about 2 weeks for Carolina chickadees. So that requires mom and dad to go out and find about 500 caterpillars each and every day for that to successfully raise that first little brood of little baby caterpillars. So most birds also forage within a given range, right? So for Carolina chickadees, that's about a 2-acre area. So basically that nesting territory must have this, a concentrated and abundant supply of food for those nestlings to survive. And what we're finding out is that, caterpillars in particular are so important to so many different species of birds that many birds are just simply not able to breed if there's not a sufficient supply of these caterpillars. Okay. Now, of course, we want in that 2-acre area a lot more than one little nest of Carolina chickadees, right? So in fact, we need a lot more than 500 caterpillars per day. Okay. And just like how the caterpillars of the monarch butterfly, they have to have that native Asclepius to eat and grow and reproduce. Other caterpillars also require native plants to eat and grow and reproduce. So non-native plants, we're talking about non-natives here, they do support caterpillars to a certain degree, but it's a limited support. And so non-native plants do not feed or support the life cycles of all the insects that have evolved here nearly to the extent that native plants do. Okay, they do a little bit. Okay, so what we're learning here is baby birds need caterpillars need native plants. And gardens compose of approximately 70% native plants. That's kind of the threshold. We see this number over and over again for different reasons, but that's a landscape that's able to produce enough native biomass that they can help support and sustain chickadee populations. Okay. This entire presentation today is all based on the work by Douglas Tallamy. I've recommended a ton of books over the years, but if I could take back all those recommendations and just recommend one, this is it, okay? What I like about Doug Tallamy so much is that, he's at University of Delaware and has a whole team of researchers and students out counting how many, caterpillars and what type of insects chickadees are bringing back to the nest. So he has all that scientific data, but he's also an intense home gardener with a 10-acre property in Southeast Pennsylvania, I believe. And where he's transforming, removing invasive plants, planting native plants, watching all that native wildlife come back. Okay, so the book's a beautiful blend of both scientific facts and research, plus this man's passion for gardening and wildlife. So lovely, lovely read. Here on the left, we can see a quote by Doug Tallamy. It says, 86% of the country is privately owned. So when you create a landscapes out of introduced Bradford pear and crepe myrtle, there are almost no caterpillars. And Tallamy says that's not just the end of reproduction for chickadees, but of all the birds out there that need those insects. And working there together with the Smithsonian and the University of Delaware, they put this lovely little simple summary together showing songbirds need thousands of insects to reproduce. Yards with non-native plants do not provide the food source for that reproduction to occur, right? So we're looking for that 70% threshold in order to create enough food, enough caterpillars in particular, for those bird populations to sustain themselves. And so, and of course, we garden for many, many reasons, right? And we're not just gardening for caterpillars, because I think it goes without saying that if we design and maintain our gardens in a way that's very favorable to caterpillar production, right, then we're also creating a garden that's very favorable to all of our pollinators, our native birds and other wildlife, all those little creatures out in our garden, because those exact same native plants that are providing that perfect or ideal foliage, for the caterpillars to eat, well, those are the same native plants that then are, offering that high quality nectar sources for the pollinators, offering that same quality fruit and seeds that, later in the season for all that native wildlife that have evolved within this area for hundreds of thousands of years, along with the plants, right? There's all these dependent relationships out there of native plants and native wildlife, right? So it's more than just caterpillars. And so now we've all seen charts like this. This is the only chart we're going to look at today. We all know the science is very clear, right? We've all seen and heard of the insect apocalypse by now, the decline in birds, all of this. This chart's obviously almost 15 years old, and it's showing a 45% decrease in the overall global invertebrate abundance across the globe over the past 40 years, right? I doubt much has changed on that trajectory in the past 15 years. So it comes down to this, right? Maybe we can't control what is happening globally, but today, right now, we can control what is happening in our own backyards, right? And this is why I feel it's more important now than ever for us gardeners to work together to rethink traditional garden design and traditional garden maintenance, right? And for us to begin shifting these societal norms of the American gardening landscape experience, right? And let's begin shifting those norms into a manner that does not have negative consequences for the environment, right? There's hundreds of ways to do positive things for the environment in our own backyards. Gardening for caterpillars is just one. Okay. So with that soapbox over, have you all heard of our Hillwood's turkey? He's a he or she, I think it's a he. I'm not a turkey expert. I'm sure someone there can just tell by looking at it if it's a he or she. But anyway, this guy or gal showed up last winter and has made quite a few appearances here on the campus. Here he's down foraging down in the new native garden down at the Collections and Research Center. Adult turkeys are omnivores. Apparently they eat everything. They love beech nuts and acorns, which is what I'm guessing he might be going for. They also eat insects. But take a guess at a moment. What do you think baby turkeys eat? Baby turkeys, right? Baby birds, yes. If you thought insects right away, yes, you're correct. Baby birds also eat insects. Baby turkeys also need insects. So for the rest of our talk today, okay, we're going to talk about how in our own backyards can we maximize the number of caterpillars, okay? And the first way I'm going to go about suggesting to do this is to simply increase the overall native biomass in your garden, okay? The easiest way to do this is to design your garden with a series of layers, okay? So we have the canopy layer, those big trees. Under that, we have an understory layer, we have shrub layer, herbaceous layer, ground cover layer, vine layer, okay? Each one of these layers on their own can support a whole array of different caterpillar species, right? But if we broaden our viewpoint out for a moment too, the more layers our gardens have, the more wildlife of all sorts it can support, okay? And then I'm going to suggest in order to create these lovely layers in our garden, we're going to mimic how Mother Nature designs, right? In our region of the country, a woodland is the dominant landscape. Most of our properties and landscapes would be woodlands if we weren't the ones interfering and turning them into what they are today, right? So this is the ecosystem. A woodland is the ecosystem that all of the insects and birds and animals have evolved with for hundreds of thousands of years along the east coast of North America, for the most part. Of course, there's other ecosystems too, but this is the one we're going to talk about today. And then, lastly, I would suggest to maximize the, the effectiveness of these layers, right? We want to plant them thickly, right? We're not talking about planting a street tree or a tree surrounded by lawn, right? Or seas of mulch, right? We want these plants to be layered. We want everybody to be touching, intermingling, and such. So, and then, of course, it's one thing to plant the right plants and to create layers, but we also need to institute a sustainable maintenance program in our garden. Such as eliminating the use of pesticides and gardening in particular in a manner that allows all the life cycle, all the stages of that insects to be completed, okay? And so we're going to keep coming back to these 5 concepts here kind of repeatedly throughout the presentation, but that's kind of the gist of what we're going to talk about for the rest of our time together. But yet with an extra twist, right, what we're going to do is now we're going to take things a little bit further, right? And we're going to see which native plants we can use for each of these layers, just a sampling, that produce the most caterpillars, right? And because what we're learning with the work of Doug Tallamy is that not all native plants are the same. They are not the same, right? There are certain species, in fact, just 5% of the local plant species, of our local native plants, right? They host nearly 75% of the caterpillar species. Okay, so now what we're learning is that in order for our landscape to be richly productive and abundant in caterpillars, then landscapes should contain at least a few of these keystone species for caterpillars, right? And by keystone species are plants in an ecosystem that have a disproportionately large effect on the abundance and diversity of other species in that ecosystem. So head and shoulders above everybody else, oak trees. Okay, we've all heard about oak trees over and over again. Well, they are a premier example of a caterpillar keystone species because oak trees support well over 500 different species of caterpillars in our region. Okay, another native tree, yellowwoods, they support 0. Okay, so if we're going to start thinking of native plants, well, now let's choose, you know, an oak tree over a yellowwood because you have 500 caterpillars to 0 caterpillars. Now, that 0 caterpillars, that's kind of, those are the bookends. Like that's the extreme examples of both. There's everything else in between. And, you know, maybe we all can't convert or want to convert our entire yard to a woodland. Like I get it, right? Maybe we have a tiny, tiny little space. But so maybe, you know, we do have enough space to plant a couple of caterpillar keystone species. So that's why we're going to kind of direct into these like powerhouse players. So some great sources, the Native Plant Finder. This is a direct consequence and using Doug Tallamy's work, along with Desiree Narango, is putting this together. It's a work in progress, but what you do is you put in your zip code, you click Find Native Plants, and it literally lists the native plants for each of those layers based on the number of caterpillars that they support. It's a really good starting point to starting to think, okay, what are the most effective plants in my yard and what could I add? But it does have limitations. They group all of our native oaks together into one group, and I like specifics. So, but it's a good starting point. And then the Audubon also has an amazing website, which has a whole entire section for native plants for birds. And then when you also enter your zip code, then when you get into that list, you can filter it by caterpillar production, right? So it's going to then filter out amongst the native plants for your zip code, the best ones for caterpillars. And it's nice because it gives specific species, but yet it doesn't tell you how many different caterpillars. So it's a little bit of a game to play back and forth to see just exactly which ones might be best for your landscape. So here we go. We're going to look at just a couple examples of each of those layers, right? We already mentioned the oak trees for the big canopy trees support well over 500 different caterpillars. Here's the giant leopard moth and a woolly bear caterpillar. The Viceroy, this is the middle slide, the middle picture there. That's our cherry trees, our native cherries. Now, this is different. We're not necessarily talking about those Japanese cherries around the tidal basin, right? Those support caterpillars some, but it's our native cherries, which is a huge, huge group of plants, support 390 different species, including the Viceroy. And we see Viceroys quite a bit at the Hillwood cutting garden, along with monarchs. They're very similar, but the distinction that I know, if you see that black bar that kind of separates the panes, Viceroys have that and a monarch doesn't. So yeah, little butterfly fact for you there. And then Caria, look, 240 different species. And never in my life have I ever considered purposely planting a hickory, pecan, or bitternut in my landscape or recommended to others, but yet it makes me think a little twice, you know, a little different about them. And that maybe if I had an existing hickory in the yard, well, maybe this is a reason maybe to not remove that genus of the hickory, pecans, and bitternuts, right? Because they're supporting so many different things. And for this first slide, I particularly wanted to pick out pictures that show all that fruit too, because again, we're not gardening just for caterpillars, right? The native plants are producing the best foliage for caterpillars. Those same native plants are then also producing the most high quality food and sustenance for you know, other mammals and birds out there too during other seasons. Okay, evergreens. Okay, you know, we all live kind of in suburban or urban areas. If you're like me, I kind of like to screen my neighbors a little bit. You know, I like my private oasis in the backyard. Fortunately, a lot of pollinators and caterpillars also like that evergreen screening. So here I was totally shocked to see pines in general are supporting 237 different species, including the beautiful Luna moth there. Never would I have thought the pine needles were that tasty, but apparently a lot of creatures do think that. But for smaller gardens or medium-sized gardens, you know, my two favorite recommendations for evergreen screen are the American holly and then our native juniper or the eastern red cedar. is a common name. Both have a wider range of species of caterpillars that they are host to, besides beautiful, highly nutritious fruit later in the season. Both of those are extremely adaptable plants too. Like pines are adaptable, but yet they get huge, they drop their lower limbs, maybe not best for screening. Hollies and eastern red junipers can take sun to shade, moist to dry, adaptable with soils. I mean, they're tough plants. So great plants to add to the community and your landscape to help foster all those connections out there with the plants and animals. Understory trees, we often think of this as those spring flowering trees, right? These are the smaller deciduous trees. Hawthorns, Hillwood has quite a few hawthorns. We have a couple winter king hawthorns over by the cafe. Wide range of supporting of different species, over 168 different species. I always love to recommend Amelanchiers. They're either the serviceberry or they're known as Juneberry. I think it's the best substitute for a vase-shaped, multi-stem, small flowering tree, similar to like how a crepe myrtle might grow. So blooms in the spring, then gets lovely berries that turn to a red, often in June, hence the name Juneberry. Very edible even to humans. I don't eat a lot of fruit in the garden, but Juneberries is something that's actually a pretty tasty little fruit if you get them before the birds do. And the birds absolutely devour them. They do not last on the bushes for long. And then sassafras supports 38 species, a lot more of a natural style plant for your garden. I often like to recommend sassafras for a garden that's underway of transforming from a conventional garden to a sustainable garden. And it's because it's a colonizing, suckering shrub. So you can start with a small start of sassafras, plant it in amongst your azaleas and boxwoods and traditional landscape plants, and then slowly, 5, 10, 15 years down the road, that sassafras will get bigger and bigger. And then next to it, some baby suckers will come up and you'll start developing a little bit of a colony, right? So the idea is that it'll slowly overtake those non-native understory plants as you begin to, appreciate and the beauty of the sassafras alone. Then those other plants can be removed, and it's not like you're wiping out a garden right away, right? But let's face it, a lot of native plants can do that. You interplant them amongst your existing landscape, and then over time, as they develop, you chop down more and more of the non-natives so that your garden's never bare. Okay, shrubs, we all need shrubs. And man, I was shocked when blueberry came up near the top of the list, right? If we ever needed another reason to add blueberries to our gardens, here they support nearly 300 different species, right? Besides all those beautiful berries for us to eat, as well as, again, if you beat the birds, you can get some lovely blueberries. So bayberries, one of my favorite broadleaf evergreen shrubs to recommend for a wide variety of reasons. They are tough as nails. They can handle drought, seashore conditions, salt. They're quick growing. They're cheap to buy. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why bayberry, I don't know why it's not used more. It's a bit rangy, right? Bayberry can easily get 10 by 10 if left unpruned, but maybe that's the size shrub we need. But it's also can be pruned and formalized a bit and probably maintained at about a 6-foot height. And maybe could be an evergreen replacement for all those privet hedges we see out there, the invasive privets, or so many different things. I think bayberry is well underutilized. Besides, it's supporting well over 100 different species of caterpillars. And then sumacs, I think, is another underappreciated plant. Right, they're a little bit wild, rangy, but there are all different sizes. There's a lovely dwarf, wide-spreading but low-growing sumac called Rus growlow, which is widely used in the industry, the landscaping industry, for being tough as nails and colonizing slopes, big open spaces. But also looks lovely. It's just a wood that can go underneath trees and park shade as just a nice 2-foot tall ground cover. So while supporting nearly 60 different species of caterpillars. And then our last woody kind of layer that we can add, grapevines. Grapevines, I don't recommend to plant grapevines, right? I mean, they're huge, but yet another reason why, if they're already on your property, what a great reason to leave a grapevine, right? They support 70 species, including this woolly bear tiger moth here. A native vine I really do love and recommend a lot is the Virginia creeper. What a great all-purpose vine. They often germinate in our gardens on their own, right? if you have an ugly shed or an ugly fence or anything like they're not a destructive climber like English ivy, but it's a gentle climber, but it will cover a shed within a couple seasons. Gorgeous red fall color, really highly nutritious berries are produced for migrating birds particularly. And then here we have 32 different species, including the Virginia creeper sphinx moth there that feed on that foliage, using that plant as a host plant for those young caterpillars to eat. And then the good old poison ivy, right? We've heard, good stories about their berries too. It's almost the same story as Virginia creeper. Maybe there's a reason to leave it. I don't know. You can decide on poison ivy, but it does support, it is a native plant. It does support caterpillar production. Okay, so compare and contrast, right? For this slide, I used the Smithsonian's National Zoo Lepidoptera Index of 2017. And what I liked about it, it had a lot of the exact same information from Doug Tallamy's work on all the natives, but it also listed some non-natives, right? So on the left there, we can see a lot more of our common native plants that are out in our landscape. That full gamut of, from elms hosting over 200 different, caterpillars. Black walnuts is another one. Like, would you recommend black walnut? Well, probably not, but yet they're everywhere. So it's a reason to leave them. Everybody talks about why they want to cut down black walnuts, right? But they do have high wildlife value. Then again, going all the way down to the skewed result of the yellow wood with 0 caterpillars. Hopefully one day they find a caterpillar feeding on that. But if you compare and contrast to our non-native plants, ginkgos only support 5 caterpillars. Crepe myrtles support three caterpillars. Butterfly bushes, which, you plant a butterfly bush for butterflies, well, that's the adult butterflies that go floating around, generalist feeders, sucking nectar everywhere. But we really want caterpillars, right? That's what's more important. They only host 1. Japanese zelkovas are planted on bloody every street. It's a well overplanted street tree, 0 caterpillar productions. Dawn redwood, 0. Mahonias and Nandinas, 2 really common broadleaf evergreens in old school traditional landscaping, 0. Okay, so time to rethink what we're planting in our gardens. So just to throw a wrench into the whole story here, pawpaw trees, Asimina triloba, beautiful understory woodland tree, very common in our woods. Also a suckering colonizing tree, kind of like the sassafras. So another good wood to intermingle into a traditional garden. 20 years later, it's taking up its own space. But either way, the idea with this is that the zebra swallowtail here, pictured in both caterpillar and adult stage, that pawpaw is the only host plant. So just like how milkweed is the only host plant for monarch caterpillars, well, so is the same for our zebra swallowtail here. The only host plant that caterpillar can eat on is pawpaw foliage, right? So I mention this because please don't get caught up too much on the numbers of this and that. I think the more important takeaway is that our local wildlife is supported much, much more with our native plants, right, rather than these non-native plants, and it's all because of those dependent relationships that have formed over the course of evolution out there between our native plants and native insects, right? So. Yeah. Specialists. Don't forget about the specialists. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit now. Now we're going to work into herbaceous plant material, right? And for gardeners, I think this is where all the real work takes place. The fun in the garden takes place because, theoretically, you plant trees and shrubs once, and other than some general pruning, you're done, right? So herbaceous plants, on the other hand, are completely dynamic. They're constantly changing and shifting in the garden. Many are short-lived. They all have different life cycles, and they add, all this excitement and change to the garden. Not only change from year to year, but from season to season, right? And they're also great if you don't want to have a complete woodland. Maybe you enjoy the sunshine. Maybe you want to plant a meadow. Tons of options out there with high flower power for meadows. Or maybe you have a very, very small space or you just garden in containers on a patio or a balcony. Well, native herbaceous plants would be great options. And fortunately, they also are key habitat and host plants for caterpillars. So just like, oak trees were the head and shoulders above everybody else for the woody plants, right? Well, the herbaceous equivalent to an oak tree are the goldenrods or solidago species. There's a ton of different solidago species out there. There's a lot of them are for sun. There are quite a few for woodland gardens too. Here's the camouflage looper moth. I mean, what a beautiful moth there. But do you see the caterpillar stage? There he is. He's called a camouflage looper moth because what he does, he's literally eats off pieces of that flower and then he sticks them on his back, right? So he's basically camouflaging himself from predators. There's a whole plethora of different caterpillars that use the same strategy. So there's such an exciting world out there of diversity. So yes, goldenrods, head and shoulders above everybody else. The sunflower family, the Helianthus, another really big group of different species. Here we have the painted lady butterfly is one of the plants, or the sunflowers are just one of the host plants for the painted lady. And then lastly, eupatorium. I've raved on for years about Joe Pye weed, how beautiful it is, and every garden needs to have Joe Pye weed. Well, now another attribute is that it's going to support 34 different species of caterpillars in our gardens. Okay. So, just like that whole pawpaw story, right, that we don't need to base our garden solely on the number of caterpillars it's producing, because we're gardening for so many more reasons, right, not just caterpillars. So here's a good example. This is Senna marilandica, or wild senna. This is one of my favorite native plants that did not show up on any of those plant databases, right, for caterpillar production. But as a plant itself, I love senna's bold texture and form. Like this plant easily gets 6, 7, 8 feet tall, 4 to 5 feet wide, blooms with beautiful yellow flowers. There you can see on the left it blooming in the cutting garden in about June or so. So it's early for how big it is. Great as a screening plant too, as a herbaceous plant. This does not get woody. But when we start looking at how it supports wildlife and being a positive contributor to the environment, so we see it's a host plant for sulfur butterflies, which we do see floating around the cutting garden quite a bit. The Xerces Society labels the flowers of Senna marilandica as having a special value to bumblebees, right? And its seeds are a preferred food source of wild turkeys, right? Now, there's Mr. Turkey again, and I remember reading that years ago, and I thought, well, I'll never see a wild turkey, but whatever, I guess that's kind of fun. But there he is. I think this is a picture that Jessica took, and that little guy, he was up in the cutting garden, middle of the day, visitors are around, and he was just claiming that garden his own. So I say, bravo, Mr. Turkey, you can eat whatever you find up there. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit again. We're going to go a little design heavy into things. And we're going to discuss this idea of a matrix style planting. And I think this matrix, rather than listing lists and lists of perennial plants and saying this attributes, right, we're going to see how we actually put the plants together. And I think this is particularly important for this herbaceous layer because this concept aligns very well with ecological garden design for a multitude of reasons. Okay. And it's also how the herbaceous layers of Hillwood's newest garden, our new native garden down at the Collections and Research Center, this is how that herbaceous layer was designed by our landscape architect, Alan Summers, Robinson Anderson Summers. And here, if you're at the bottom of the slide, if you're down here, it's almost like you're standing on the parking deck and the lower parking deck and you're looking down. Here's that bioretention, this object that's shaped like a sock or a shoe. That's the depression where we're restoring holding water from the parking deck. Here's that little patio, here's the walkway. The stair tower is kind of down over here to the left and such. But if you start looking, look, matrix A2, matrix C, matrix L, matrix N, there's a lot of matrices in here. If we zoom in on one here, we'll see matrix E-3. That means that's the third time this matrix has been repeated down in the garden. It's composed of 15 plants of Achilles canadensis, that's columbine. It has 40 Hugra americanus in it, 15 dwarf iris cristata, and then 40 phlox soanifera, woodland phlox, right? So what that means, and then you can see it's pointing to this little shaded in area. If we back up for a moment, we can see a large tree, right? That's a new canopy tree, soon to be. We have a shrub layer here. I don't know what these are. This is on a different map. And then underneath that tree and shrubs, then we have this matrix, right, of these different native plants, right? And so I'm a big fan of this style of planting for many reasons. First of all, I think it's beautiful, and it's certainly mimicking nature and how Mother Nature puts things together. And as I mentioned, it's going to increase the overall ecological functioning of the garden by producing really high quality habitat. Okay. So in short, what a matrix style is, it's not the easiest concept to explain. So we're going to look at a lot of examples, but it's basically when you combine that ground cover layer and the herbaceous layer into one layer, right? So that all of those plants weave together, they intermingle. One way to think about it is think about just intermingling a grass or a carex with a fern and with another traditional ground cover, something similar to the matrix here position, mixing them all together, throwing them up in the air, where they land, you plant. Okay, so it's the opposite of the traditional blocking system where you plant 12 daylilies, and next to that you plant 12 sedum olive joys, and maybe behind those you planted 12 Russian sage, right? That's not ecological. That's traditional garden design. This is ecological garden design, right? And really what it comes down to is that ground cover layer, that's the workhorse or the functional layer of the garden, right? And this is the layer that we often ignore the most. But the ground cover layer works as a green mulch. It's often described that green mulch, what it does is it completely covers the ground. It helps prevent erosion. It reduces the need or eliminates the need for hardwood mulch, that annual mulching chore. It reduces weeds because now we're reduced competition because the ground's covered with plants. And the best of all, it creates prime habitat for all sorts of caterpillars, particularly pupating and overwintering caterpillars, which we'll get to, right? And then amongst this functional ground cover layer is where you're interplanting more of the traditional ground or traditional upright flowering perennials like columbines would be peppered in amongst there, right? To come up, add that flash of color, and then they often recede into the background. Okay. So let's see some examples. Okay, picture on the left, that is straight out of nature. That is a Mother Nature design of one carex, one fern species, and white wood aster, okay? I mean, it's gorgeous, right? And we may even consider that leaf litter and all that might be even part of this package too, right? Because that's ecological. Those leaves are doing more than if that was hardwood mulch, okay? On the right is a matrix style planting at the National Cathedral, again of a carex. There's heuchera in the bottom. This plant here is Amsonia, and we even see a fern up here, okay? Again, covering the ground, preventing erosion, creating a green carpet, making habitat. That's what that type of style of planting is working on there. Okay, here's probably the most simple matrix style planting of all. This is at Glenstone Museum. It's just simply one fern and one carex putting together. To upgrade this to the next notch, I would say it'd be great to add one traditional spreading ground cover, something more with leaves as opposed to blades of grass and ferny foliage, right? So something like a pacra or a tiarella or green and gold, something that's going to stay low and spread wide. And then could you intermingle some of those columbines, things that'll shoot up out of that, the Virginia bluebells, right? Or the white wood aster, right? All of those could be added to this in no particular place. Like anything could be planted anywhere in a way with a matrix, right? But takes a little bit of horticultural knowledge and gardener experience of learning which plants work together in the same matrix, right? You have to kind of balance the competition and vigor and all this. And that's where the part of gardening with herbaceous plants is so fun. Here's a lovely example of a little bit more complicated matrix style planting. This is something that Francis Vandenbroek did over the past couple of years. Here you can clearly see that grid-like pattern of the green tiarellas, right? Eventually that will fill in. But amongst that, when you start dissecting, you'll also see some random heuchera americanas in here. You'll also see this is a evergreen Solomon seal, like some of those are popping up through. She's got assorted ferns in there, fairly new planting. So not 100% native, but she's definitely approaching that 70% native biomass goal, especially if you include the 2 dogwoods. These are native dogwoods that she included in the design. And what we don't see in this picture that makes this planting even more beneficial to the environment is the fact that Frances, along with a team of gardeners and volunteers, removed a huge swath of a monoculture planting of invasive Japanese pachysandra, right? So out with the invasives, in with a new native matrix to help support the environment. Here's a zoom up of yet another matrix style planting near the cafe. Another example where we removed invasive plants, barberry, vacca minor, replaced it with a nearly 70% native biomass matrix style planting. What we don't see, or here we see the trunk here, that's a trunk of the hawthorn, right? That supports 168 species of caterpillars. Here we see a shrub of a 9-bark, Fothergilla, 2 native shrubs also hosting their caterpillars. And then the herbaceous planting matrix, again, taking away that monoculture, putting in this medley of different plants that intermingle, weave together to create a green carpet, right? Using a high percentage of native plants. We have the Tiarella, which is all over Hillwood. It's one of our favorites here. This purple color, that's woodland phlox, Phlox stolonifera. And then we also have dwarf iris here. This is Iris cristata. Those are the native combos. Non-native, couple hellebores sprinkled in. Non-native geranium. This is Geranium Bevins variety. That could have been the native geranium. Myosotis seeded in from above. That's forget-me-nots. And we even have some little minor bulbs in here. This is Galanthus, right? So again, 70% native is kind of that goal, but yet if your favorite plants are not native, you can still fit some in. And then, of course, with a bit more room, of course, more is possible. This is a rain garden that I constructed myself in my own backyard this past spring. My yard is very gently sloping, so it was a good opportunity to put in some type of water treatment or water control. Basically, I dug a big hole. I threw the dirt that was left out of this hole onto the backside, the downhill slide, to kind of make a berm, which also turned into a path. And then I planted this in a matrix style planting using a lot of native plugs, right? These are landscape plugs. This is in particular is the fox sedge, Carex vulpinoides, was the base of my matrix, combined with a few of these. This is Pacra aurea, the golden groundsel, one of my favorite spreading, aggressive spreading native plants. Those two combined would form the base of that green carpet. And green carpet doesn't have to be short. Depends on what's else is going with it. That Carex vulpinoides gets knee high or more, but being a solid mass, I still am considering that the green ground cover layer. And then shooting up through that, this is a great blue lobelia. And then here is I planted about a dozen of those swamp milkweeds. That's the same milkweed that was getting chomped on my first slide. And then a couple of Iris versicolors. That's a limited plant palette. The idea was to plant it really, I wish I could plant it thicker, but I was amazed by the end of the first year how much those plugs and these little tiny Iris, look at that, one sprig turned into this. No soil amendments, there was nothing. And this was mucky soil, like it was not an ideal planting situation where a lot of non-native plants would fail. These plants thrive, right? Picking the right plants for the right location. And look who found the garden by the middle or end of the summer here is a ginger woolly bear munching away on that Iris versicolor foliage. He hung out there for a couple days in the garden. Okay, so last topic of the day, this idea of completing the life cycle, right? We've touched on this a wee bit, but we've talked more about the caterpillar stage. We've talked about adult caterpillar stage, right? Or adult butterfly stage. We've not talked much about that pupating stage, right? Well, butterflies and moths, they have 4 parts of their life cycle, right? So, for example, with oaks in particular, 94% of the caterpillars that are munching away on that foliage, when it comes time to pupate, they drop to the ground, right? And then once on the ground, they either burrow into the ground slightly, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter or in any of that other loose organic matter underneath the plantings. or they often tunnel into soft and decaying wood, right? They're looking for places to safely hunker down and pupate and hide from predators, right? So this is just yet another reason why it's so important to create a garden with all these layers, right? You know, native plantings foster pupa development, right? A lawn is not a natural pupating place for caterpillars, right? Lawns are extremely compacted. There's no places to hide. You're either going to try to burrow into a rock hard, you know, concrete surface of the turf, right? There's no places to hide, right? And then if by chance underneath those trees we had lots of leaves and debris from over the course of the season, well, we know what happens when our landscape teams come in, right? Pull out the blowers, they blow every shred of organic matter out, right? So then those caterpillars, which were down there pupating, well, they're no longer safe either, right? They don't pupate in a bed of hardwood mulch, right? We want to recreate, mimic nature, recreate that soft organic matter, right? So there's all these different ways why, you know, thinking again of what Mother Nature has done for thousands of years, creating these rich and loose organic matter that's filled with leaves, sticks, twigs, right? Hence, let's leave all that, right? Let's leave the stems, let's leave the leaves, let's leave those old branches and logs if we can, right? And let's encourage the neighbors to do that too, okay? So this is the picture on the right. It's another picture from my garden at home. Hopefully trying to show those different layers in the garden. We have the birch tree, right? Huge caterpillar production tree. Fothergilla shrubs, there's some inkberries in there, and then a wide range, eclectic range of different emergent and ground cover native perennials. The idea, again, create that green carpet. All of those birch leaves are allowed to drop naturally in this garden. There is no more annual mulching occurring like at first I did when the planting was new, but now plants take the role of mulch. And then lastly, when those caterpillars are pupating down there, well, it's another food source for the birds during the winter, right? So as much as I want all those caterpillars to pupate safely, we also want to feed the birds, and that's all part of the whole situation. And then lastly, also including completing the life cycle, right? So just like leaving the leaves, let's also leave our stems and delay fall cleanup until the spring. This is what the cutting garden looked like in December. We're leaving that be. If you do start cutting down, like try not to cut everything at once, just take nibbles in places so any animals and critters left in there can find a new habitat place. When we do eventually cut down, it's best to leave 6 to 8 inches of stems, particularly plants with hollow stems, because that's all types of overwintering pollinators are inside those hollow stems, right? If we can, please, don't bag up that debris and put it out the curb. Either chop it up fine and let it lay in the garden as a mulch. It'll help mulch the garden, help prevent weeds. Birds will use all those clippings to make nests, right? But if you have to move it, can it move to the backyard, laid lightly out, so then those animals and critters can emerge out of those stems, they can complete their life cycle, right? Is what it's all about. And then let's also, while we're at it, let's redefine what we call weeds, right? So many native plants are considered weeds, right? Because they pop up in the yard by themselves. These are pictures from my yard at home. This middle plant is a tall bone set, right? This is a pollinator magnet, right? You see this all along the side of the road, but here you could see 2 yellow swallowtails, a black swallowtail, and the good old monarch butterfly there. That's just, the adults flying around, right? Pokeweed, another, I know it's a weed, people, drives people mad, but yet that plant, I see birds eating off that plant for months and months and months, right? And then it's the same with violets, right? Just like pawpaws and milkweeds, violets are also a host plant, and it's the only host plant for great spangled fritillary butterflies. So if we don't have violets, we don't have great fritillary butterflies, right? It's a simple as that. And then my last slide today, I just wanted to introduce everybody to one of Doug Tallamy's newest projects. It's called Homegrown National Park. As we mentioned in the very beginning of our presentation, 86% of the land in this country is in private hands. Lawn or turf grass have replaced 40 million acres of native plant communities across the US. So this is approximately the size of New England. is covered in lawn. 500 square miles of lawn are added to this country every single year. And according to the USDA in 2006, a study was done that in Maryland alone, we have 1.1 million acres of lawn. And this is more than twice the area in Maryland that is devoted to state parks, state forests, and wildlife management areas. Okay. So the main idea and concept and initial goal of Homegrown National Park is that if all of us gardeners and everyone, every community member work together to replace just half the lawn in this country with native plantings, that we would create our very own homegrown national park that is bigger than the combined square footage of the Everglades, Yellowstone, Yosemite, Grand Teton, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands, and the Olympic, Sequoia, Grand Canyon, Denali, and the Great Smoky Mountains National Parks. Okay, if we can restore the natural ecosystem function of these 20 million acres, then we can create the country's largest park system, right? All of which is created by the thousands and thousands of small efforts by a great deal of small little efforts by a great deal of people. Okay? So restoring habitat within our human-dominated landscapes is critical for the survival of species. We must do more than just create biological corridors that allow plants and animals to move from habitat fragment to the next habitat fragment. We must also build and develop landscapes and maintain those landscapes where animals can actually live and reproduce. So I'll end today with another quote by Doug Tallamy that says, "In the past, we have asked one thing of our gardens, that they be pretty. Now they have to support life, sequester carbon, feed pollinators, and manage water." Okay, much more than gardening for caterpillars. And with that, I say thank you, and that's all I have for you today. So, thank you.
Well, that's great, Drew. Thank you so much. So I've been kind of monitoring the chat and the question and answer. So if as we're going through this, if other things come to your mind, please add them on there, and we'll talk a little bit of talk a little bit about your questions and get Drew to give some answers. So we're going to start with one about, I think Carol has planted a pipe vine for swallowtails, and she was a little curious about how likely she is to actually attract them to her garden. She's hoping there's other ones in the area, but did you have any thoughts about that?
Hey, Jessica, you know what they say, you plant it and they come. And I have a pipe vine at home too. I've never seen anything on it, but I do recall, I think it was our field trip to Chanticleer, and they were pointed out to us on their huge pipe vine, which was a monster covering half of the building. They were pointing out this, the larvae of the pipe vine swallowtail. So, I don't know how, I would say if you reduce, there's no pesticides in the garden, right? And you have a vigorous vine, then I don't know why they wouldn't find it, right? Because that's kind of what happens. But great question.
Then we have Jenny would appreciate any recommendations for good sources for native plants.
Yeah, there's a lot of good sources. So just Google even our local area. There are specialty nurseries. There's a dozen just in our region, but there's a website you could go to that's called nutsfornatives.com. Nutsfornatives.com, and they list all of the local retailers that are selling native plants, right? But I'll also throw in a plug for Izel native plants. They are out of Washington, D.C. IZEL, online presence, great way for homeowners to buy native plant plugs. So they kind of act as a broker for homeowners, because it's kind of hard for homeowners to buy flats of landscape plugs. And they're great, they're here locally, and they ship it to you through the mail. So yeah, several different ways to find native plants.
We also had a staff member answer too that the Maryland Native Plant Society also has a great list of native plant nurseries. So throw that in there too. So Mary was surprised there aren't any maples on the list of supportive trees. Did you have any comment on that?
That's a really, really good question. And I was hard to choose the cycle down. And one of the issues I came across is that some of these websites, again, they don't differentiate between native and non-native. So that became a little bit trickier with my selection process because I wanted to choose ones with more natives. So yes, I did come across where maples were on a different website, where maples were also very highly supportive, but yet they also were including the non-native maples in. So it was a little bit of there is a little bit of a gray zone when it comes to caterpillar host plants. But yes, maples are extremely good. Red maples, a great landscape tree, and it does support a wide array of caterpillars. So yeah, maples are also a really good one up there near the top of the list.
Great, thank you. And then Charlotte is asking for garden tours. What do you think would be the best place to show visitors one of the matrix plantings and talk about the 70% native plant idea?
Well, you know, that's a great question. And really, in a year or two, it's going to be the new native garden down at the CRC. Like that's all, it's all, but you know, it's all matrix style plantings. It's all 100% native plants. But everybody starts small. You know, so it's a little bit harder to envision and to celebrate the concept when everybody's so small, you know. So I would think here, the couple examples I showed there, yeah. But even Marshall is doing areas over in the woodland areas where, you know, where our Pachysandra replacement project was taking place, where we removed, you know, because it's all part of the conversation. It's not just planting native plants, it's how it's maintained. What are you removing and putting in instead, right? But Marshall was using probably that 70% threshold too. In his areas, using a lot of the woodland phloxes, the tiarellas. It's the same. We have a small, you know, palette of woodland plants that we kind of have adopted and are spreading all around the campus to help create some type of continuity. So if you only had to go to one space, then maybe the most established is that little planting at the edge of the cutting garden, between the cutting garden and the front door of the admin building over by the cafe. On that slope there, underneath the two hawthorns, is probably maybe the most established concept.
And we'd say too, maybe, you know, Francis is planting too at around the dacha for something being in the garden for a garden tour.
Yeah, that's right, on the garden tour too.
You
yeah,
think
right
that's probably pretty close to.
Yeah, between the dacha and the vista overlook, right? Along that way.
Yeah, we're working on that. Yeah. One other question. I know you were really focusing on caterpillars, but have you been following the monarchs and how they've made made some of a comeback, like along in California? I don't know if you had any more thoughts about what else is going on with monarchs through the country. You've heard anything else?
Just from a little bit of like side studies I've seen this year. Yes, there is a slight rebound, but it's a rebound from I think some studies were showing a 95% decrease in the population of monarchs, particularly the West Coast. You know, there's the West Coast, which is a smaller migration route, and then the East Coast. I believe it was 95% decrease, like the past 3 to 5 years over the West Coast, and they're alarmed by that because, of course, you can't sustain a population with 5% of their population from 20 years before, right? The East Coast also suffered huge reductions of 2/3. I'm kind of throwing that number is kind of just coming out of the air. But yet last year, the counts went up on both East and West Coast. So it is literally a teeter-totter of such low thresholds. It is scary of what it's going to mean. But yeah, there's so many different reasons why the monarchs are struggling, besides not having milkweed, pesticides in the landscape, the agriculture industry, and then their overwintering grounds in Mexico are threatened and having issues. So there's so many different things. So, but what can we do in our own yards? We can plant milkweed, we can eliminate pesticides, right? Like that's what we can control starting this year.
And Kathy just wanted to point out too that she believes that native bees and monarch plants for them are included in some of the infrastructure bill that just became law. So we can all, you know, applaud that.
Yeah, so, bravo. Yeah.
So then also just the last thing, you know, lots of appreciation for you, Drew, and for this presentation. And people love to see butters, you know, of course. So again, thank you so much. And I will turn it back over to you for the next one.
That's perfect. Let me see here. I may stop sharing. So our next presenter today, who's beginning to fire things up, is Andrew Beatenbaugh, who's going to speak to us today about the history, the lure, and the cultivation of the vanilla orchid. So Andrew, I think it's all yours. And I think you're still on mute.
Yeah, I had to get it unmuted there real quick. So I want to make sure we get there to there, and hopefully my chair stays in the right place. It likes to roll around on me. Well, good morning. I hope everyone is having a good day so far. My name is Andrew Beatenbaugh. I'm the orchid and tropical specialist here at Hillwood. We're going to try to have a brief conversation about vanilla. I don't know how brief that's going to be. So we're gonna move forward, and we're gonna start talking about the history and some special facts known to this exotic species. Let's move forward. I'm gonna get my little laser pointer together. All right, so we're gonna start out long ago during the Cretaceous period, about 120 million years ago. And so what we see here about 120 million years ago is the first flowering plants emerge. And in that transition between 120 million to about 60 million years ago, plants moved from being these ground flowering dwellers up into epiphytes and lithophytes and other forms of growth within the trees and rocks and whatnot during that time period. Now, what we see about 60 million years ago, vanilla does emerge somewhere between 120 and 160 million years ago. However, it never got the message of becoming a true epiphyte. It decided to stay a hemiophyte. And I'm throwing these terms out there. Don't quite have them on my slides, but an epiphyte, obviously, it lives in a tree. It needs to get its water and air flow up in the tree, and it may get its nutrition from things surrounding that area. A hemiophyte essentially starts at the bottom, at the ground level as a terrestrial, germinates its seeds, and then kind of works its way up a tree, and then it finds its way at the top of a tree where the pollinators and abundant sunlight take place for flowering to have for the plant. So after the Cretaceous period and moving on into, get my next slide up, we're going to kind of talk about what is vanilla. Vanilla, obviously, its own genus. It comes from the family Orchidaceae. It is a flowering plant, and it has a flavoring agent that is extracted from the pods, which is called vanillin. And we'll kind of get into that later as we move on through this talk here. So next slide. Okay, so the cured vanilla bean, as we know it today, as of commerce, it comes as an unripened fruit from the Mexican bourbon vanilla, which is called Vanilla planifolia. There are other two forms called Tahitiensis, Vanilla Tahitiensis, and Vanilla pompano, which comes from the West Indian Islands. All three of these species have derived from one single species native in America to Mexico, Central America, and South America. It is a big debate whether once it was brought from the Americas throughout the rest of the world, that cultural conditions could have changed some of the genetic variations of the plant, or these plants have somehow existed elsewhere, and there's been some debate on that as well, because there's vanillinoids, which are other orchids, terrestrials, that are found throughout the world. So we're really not sure, still kind of a big debate on that. But, moving forward, where vanilla really comes to play in modern human society is the Native Americans, the Teutonic Indians especially. They were probably the first to use it. The next group of Native Americans who really elaborated and took it from the Teutonic Indians were the Aztecs. The Aztecs actually at some point took over the Teutonic Indians and adopted some of their cultural conditions or their cultural portions of their society adopted by the Aztecs. And the Aztecs called it the black flower. And it is known, how we know this is in what you will see here in the left is some of the platelets here that you can see vanilla vine down here in the bottom. And as you can see, cacao is what we think this is cacao in the background, and various forms of significant plant material and or food for the Aztecs. And that's kind of how we see the beginnings of vanilla in modern human cultivation. These folks were the ones that were highly important to bringing what we see to vanilla to today. The next, moving on, during the Spanish conquest of the Americas and discovering the various things, looking for gold, that was their main intent, obviously. But they came in contact with the Aztecs, such as Hernan Cortez. And when Montezuma first appeared and saw the Spanish, he thought that these were the gods. And so the story goes is they drank this elixir, the Aztecs, it was called Tlaxcala, and it was made of bitter chocolate with vanilla added to it and hot chilies. It's very high in antioxidants, but it was known to them as the drink of the gods. And when Montezuma obviously introduced to his court Hernan Cortez, he offers him the drink of the gods, thinking that he is a god-like figure. And that is kind of the way the story goes. And from this point, the Spanish took the vanilla and wanted to know what this was, the black flower, and they figured out what it was, and then they took it, and that's how we get it to move across the rest of the world. This goes along with most of the colonial powers at that time period. It was, the Spanish kind of started it, and then it just kind of flowed with the English, the Dutch, and the French, and they all kind of adopted it, picked it up somewhere along the way, especially moving into the islands of the Caribbean, as it were being moved from Central America, Mexico, into the islands of the Caribbean, where we kind of see the first startings of the Pompano, which is the West Indian form of the vanilla. Moving on to our next slide, kind of jump around on this slide a little bit, down at the bottom first, where we first start seeing in European societies, like King Louis court, they kind of picked up vanilla, and I also drink a drink that was with chocolate as well, and it was a more sweetened drink, kind of like hot chocolate, and it was enjoyed by those aristocrats of that time period. And majority, that's how vanilla was brought about to most of the folks at that time. It was only in the higher echelons of society. And today, how America actually got its involvement in vanilla is thanks to one of our presidents, our third president, Thomas Jefferson. During his time period in courting the French during the Revolution, along with Ben Franklin, he discovered that in Louis' court that they drank the hot chocolate and discovered the vanilla. And there was a recipe that he had found from some of the French that were influential with using the vanilla spice. And he brings back to the United States, and what is now in the Library of Congress, what you see here in the platelet on the right, this very nice handwriting here that comes back from the 1700s, is Thomas Jefferson's actual recipe for vanilla ice cream. Even though it wasn't really popular until the late 1800s, he brought this and created this recipe and kind of brought it back from France, and now it resides. This copy here resides in the Library of Congress. There is the actual recipe. I have a copy of it. So if any of you would like to have it, I will definitely give it to you. And moving forward with vanilla, more important people who are significant in vanilla's height to prominence and especially in production ability was Edmund Albius. He was an enslaved gentleman off the large island of Madagascar called La Reunion. he was enslaved about the 1820s. When he was a little boy, he was accredited for discovering how to pollinate vanilla. And he did it by hand with a wooden peg, or kind of like a little stick. And he was able to actually, fit and get the pollinate and fit it to the column where to successfully pollinate the vanilla. Once he had discovered this, his masters obviously, or his owners, the enslavers, found out about his achievement and actually awarded him his freedom. Although he never prospered for this, he was completely destitute. And there's a lot of other unusual stories for the rest of his life that I'm not going to put in there, but he is definitely accredited through history and a lot of readings that I have read and research, that he is accredited for the pollinating factor, hand pollination, because once the Spanish brought vanilla to various parts of the world where vanilla would grow near the equator, there was no native pollinators. Some native pollinators might slightly have been there. We're really not sure. There may have been some other slight bees or other birds that may have affected the plants during the move across the world in the various places that vanilla has been grown. But it's kind of like a slight touch of that research. They really haven't done a lot to that, moving forward. So we're going to go to the next slide. In 1874, a German scientist discovered vanillin, which is this is how we get the flavor of vanilla. And we know this, and that vanilla is the second highest spice behind saffron. And it is very labor intensive, much like saffron. When picking the saffron, it is done all by hand. Kind of the same with vanilla, which vanilla takes a lot more to it. It's a lot more time consuming. Obviously, the hand pollination being the one start, and then it takes about 9 months on the plant to kind of come to its maturity. And then after that, it goes through a phase of drying stages containing up to 3 years. So that's why it is about the second highest in spice, because it is highly labor intensive. The plants, one of the main things I want to show you is this bee here. This is a stingless bee. It is also going extinct. This bee typically, what we found in its natural environment is the one that it solely pollinates vanilla. And I don't think a lot of research has really been done to that, of why it is going extinct. It could be some of the same factorizations as in Drew's talk with the monarchs. Could be pesticides. It could be a varying form of reaches of why. It could be the fact of destruction of the habitat is probably our main concern. But getting back in some of the basic descriptions of vanilla, the plant has a long vine that climbs up the tree, as I was discussing earlier, as a hemiophyte. It attaches aerial roots. Each segment is kind of like a semi-rhizome or pseudobulb, and each new growth is like a new segment. And in the morning is typically when it's going to bloom. It's only going to be open for 8 to 12 hours out of the day. That's when pollination is going to be successful, is usually typically in the morning when that flower is present up in the sunlight when the sun first appears. And it'll actually close up somewhere around 8 to 12 hours if there's no pollination or anything activity going on the flower. And so this is one of the reasons it's really labor intensive going back previously, is because you have to catch it. It's a timing sequence. Once it's pollinated, you hope that the pollen takes to the flower and you start creating a seed pod. This certain stingless bee, it probably just does it as a pollination factor of going into the flower, grabbing the pollinated by the back of its head. And then it's probably the flower's most likely giving it a reward for doing this. Has a lot of sweet nectar in there back in the column. So that's one of the reasons why this bee is very crucial. And then now going back into the production, the beans that we're using that gives us the vanillin, we're gonna talk about next. And here we are. Vanillin is not naturally present on the pod itself right here. Okay, it's only when the pod is either opened and dispersed when the vanillin it's actually around the seed. And I want to make sure I get this correct because there's a lot of things that come into play here. It's a very viscous oil that surrounds the seeds and the cured pods, containing about 2% of actually the vanillin. Other organic constitutes include vanillic acid, which is odorless, glycerin, sugar, gum, calcium, oxalate, alcohols, aldehydes, esters contributing to the full fragrance of the flavor. They talk about Tahiti beans that are reddish brown being less full of flavor than the Mexican bourbon. So going back, we go back to that debate of, well, were these plants really a subspecies of Vanilla planifolia, or were they their own form brought from South America in different forms across the world? And that, like I said, is either a big debate whether planifolia is the form of the species, and then the rest of these are subspecies. That's still, like I said, that's a huge debate. So when we're talking about vanilla overall as a spice, this is where it comes from. It comes from this seed pod right here. And as that ages and browns, that's where we're going to get the vanillin, and it comes more present once the drying and the sun curing process takes place. Vanilla extract is prepared by crushing the dried vanilla beans and extracting it with alcohol. And usually that's done with high strength alcohol, usually a very high grain alcohol content. And then it is diluted to make the extract. Most of our vanilla that comes today in everyday use is going to be imitation. And the reason being is it drives the price down on the spice itself. But when it was first discovered that they could make, synthetic vanillin, it did drive the price down, but it eventually came back up. But it's not the same thing. It doesn't give you the same flavors. It does mimic it. The molecular structure is very similar, and I will get to show you some of the molecular structure. But there's some bonds that make it different and makes it more complex, and is not good for our natural system. Humans, like I said, somewhere around 10,000 years ago have been messing with plants, or even longer than that. And so we have a symbiotic relationship with the plants. And when we start synthesizing things, it creates unhealthy things in our body. So I recommend, if you're ever going to use vanilla, try not to ever use imitation vanilla. The commercially synthesized vanillin is everywhere. It's in everything, into the tissues that you use to blow your nose, to car fragrances, to you name it. And it's been an integral part of our life for at least the last 400 or 500 years. Vanilla has been a big spice within human civilization in the last 400 or 500 years. And the final thing, I wanted to show you the molecular structure. And this is the molecular structure of the natural and the synthetic. A lot of things are similar. There's a couple of different bonds that change things. And that's just the representation that I wanted to show you. I don't want to really get in deep on the molecular structure, because that's not what we're trying to do. I just kind of want to give you an understanding of the history of it, and of how vanilla has been integral part of history, and some of those folks that were a part of it as well. And not quite the end yet. I want to show you a few things, and I want to say a couple thanks for things. When we first got vanilla here, I was able to actually grow vanilla and flower it. And here we have in my hand is vanilla that was grown right here in the Hillwood greenhouses. I have cured it. It stayed on the vine for probably close to about 8 or 9 months. And I had to, this past summer, put it outside on my orchid bench. And every day that it would rain, I'd have to bring this back inside, or if I had to watch the forecast to make sure that this would not get wet and rained on, and that it would actually do sun drying. And you can kind of bend it a little bit, and I can kind of open it up a little bit there, and you can kind of see the olestrin coming out, or the vanillin, which is surrounded by the seeds and the black seeds. And when you do that, you can actually kind of smell that vanilla come present, that smell that we're all looking for, and the flavor that we're all looking for. And I just want to give a special thanks for listening to my talk. And I also want to show this book here as well. I don't know if I can get that in the picture there. This is the book that I got a lot of my, it's called Vanilla Orchids, The Natural History and Cultivation by Ken Cameron. It's a great source for more in depth on vanilla. A lot of my plates came out of this book. It's a great resource if you really want to get to learn vanilla and its deep history, and also the other vanillinoids that are found around the world as well. And a special thanks to Jared Curran, our greenhouse grower. Had he not, he comes in earlier than I do in the mornings, and he was able to actually hand pollinate the vanilla for us. And so that's how we have achieved the growing and production of vanilla here in the Hillwood greenhouses. And I want to give a big shout out and thanks to him. And thank you all for joining us today. And if you have any questions, I'm sure Drew will be able to read them to me, and we'll get to answering them as best we can.
Andrew, very nice. Thank you. I love seeing the depictions of those old, the vanilla vine and those Aztec depictions. Yeah, what a great wealth of information today. We do have a couple questions for you. The first I saw, can you remind us where vanilla is native to? It seemed like there was a little bit of a vagueness out there about who had it first, but can you
So the Teutonic Indians were the first, and the Teutonic Indians obviously lived in the region of Mexico, south and southeastern United States into Mexico and Central America. And then the Aztecs were the influential bringers of the vanilla to the format. But it was the Teutonic Indians, which were based through Mexico and the southeastern United States.
Nice. How about curing vanilla? Carol asked, how do you cure vanilla? How long does it take?
So after pollination, that seed pod takes somewhere about 8 to 9 months to get to maturity. Once it starts yellowing at the ends while it's still on the stalk of the flower stalk, then you pick that, and then it takes somewhere about 10 months to 3 years of drying in the sun, removing it from the rain to cure it. And then that's when you have actual dried vanilla. And then that's when it's actually able to either extract, or you just extract the seeds out and use it for spicing or whatever you're going to be doing.
What a long process. And I know from the little bit that I've seen, and maybe it was one of your images from before that you were thinking about using, it says vanilla, are they called vanilla plantations or vanilla farms, where it's just because you need such a large.
We'll see some, like in India, they grow them in coconut groves. In South America, they grow them in cacao groves. And essentially you're doing 2 different production crops at the same time. And a lot of, and that's usually the case mostly around the world. In most vanilla production, it's usually a combination crop, and it needs a host plant to to keep its to basically have its good cultural conditions.
Nice. Okay, another question from Felicia. It says, I believe Hillwood uses some herbs in the restaurant. Does Hillwood intend to use the vanilla it creates? You created, and you and Jared as well.
Well, if
Are you
I can
offering to give that up to the restaurant?
if I doubt I'll give this one up. I wish I could. It's like my first go around. It's always been kind of a dream of mine to actually be able to produce vanilla on my own. Yes, I would love to do it on a bigger scale and get more out, but vanilla it can be very temperamental, and it is not something that always flowers every year. So if I could get one of my good plants to really give a go at it at flowering, and we have all of the germination take, yeah, I would be glad to do that, but it ain't gonna happen in the next 5 years, I can tell you that.
I certainly want to be on that invite list for the elixir or whatever when we get that going, because you also have cacao growing in the greenhouse too. So
That is correct. I mean, my end goal is to, once I get the cacao established good enough, I'd like to actually start growing the vanilla just as you would see in a normal crop production.
Vision, the vision. I got the vision.
Yeah.
Hey, Andrew, I think that wraps us up here. Thank you so much. Lovely presentation. So with that said, everyone, it's 11:27. I see Jessica's all excited, but I'm going to put her on pause because I think I forgot that break we were supposed to have between Andrew's and mine. So let's take an official full 5-minute break so everyone can stretch, relax, get another cup of coffee. And let's say 11:33. We will meet back here and we will get rolling for our last program of the morning. Sound good? Okay, everyone, see you in 5. Okie dokies, everyone. Well, welcome back. Again, it's been a pleasure having you with us this morning. And again, just another plug for round 2 of Day of Horticulture, March 7th, 10 a.m. We'll have a total of 5 presentations that day, all horticulture related topics. So we certainly encourage you to mark your calendars and join us again in a month from now. So at this time, I'd love to introduce our Director of Horticulture, Jessica Bonilla, who's going to speak to us all about a whole wide range of different initiatives and such that are going on here at Hillwood regarding sustainability. So Jessica, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. Oh, I'm so glad that we could be together, at least in this format, since we can't be together right now in person. But I know you guys have heard like bits and pieces of our sustainability and environmental stewardship initiatives here at Hillwood, but I thought maybe this would be a good time to kind of put it all together and share that with you. So, you know, it's something very important to Hillwood as an organization, so much so that we put it in as an objective for our current strategic plan. So today I'm going to share some initiatives that we have going on in horticulture, what else is going on around campus, and how we're spreading the word. So yeah, we'll dive right on in. So, you know, one of Hillwood's and horticulture's, you know, most concrete examples of our commitment to sustainability is the Collections and Research Center garden that was just finished at the end of the year. For me, it seems like it has been going on forever. So, but I know, you know, some of you have been following its construction, and others, I've seen some of the names coming up in the chats. You know, we're actually down there helping to turn it into a reality. But for those that, you know, who might not know too much about it, so the garden came to be because of the construction of the Collections and Research Center, which resides under the lower parking deck. And that's how it gets its name so far. So what happened is we were in contact with the landscape architect, Alan Summers, like Drew said, of Anderson, or of Robinson, Anderson, and Summers in June of 2020. So Alan has helped us with garden design and other parts of the campus, and we really told him that we wanted a Hillwood-esque garden that celebrated diversity and sustainability. and which would incorporate a new bioretention pond. So for us, the biodiversity aspect would be comprised of a wide variety of natives or nativars, including those from our own regional plant community. It would maximize habitat creation, for both plants and animals, and include the replacement of the tree canopy. For sustainability, we meant that once it was established, the garden would not need irrigation or traditional mulching. We also wanted it to be accessible to visitors, so we could use it to educate our guests about sustainable gardening. So the design he came up with was fantastic, and we installed it in 2 phases. So phase 1 was completed at the end of 2020 and included the planting of the bioretention pond. So, the bioretention pond itself is an important sustainable component of the garden, and was planned and designed by Ewing Cole. That was in conjunction with the construction project. The bioretention pond collects the water from the lower parking deck and the stair tower, and this allows it to seep slowly back into the water table instead of free flowing right down into Soapstone Creek and then therefore Rock Creek directly. So this way we're not adding to the local flooding problem that we know occurs in the area. So phase 1 also included a porous pave path. So porous pave is a brand name of paving material made out of recycled rubber. So it's hard and durable, but its structure is permeable enough to allow water to flow through it. Again, this was used with the idea to reduce runoff from hard surfaces. Kate and I are continuing to discuss where else we can use this, through the campus. We don't want, these initiatives to be just one-hit wonders. These are things that we are committed to and want to use other places. And, and runoff is really an important part of being sustainable and taking care of what's going on your property. So I'll say that, good sustainable gardening starts with the soil. So we really need to have these plants function. We need the garden to function. They need to do what they need to do, just like, Drew was saying. So we need the plants to be healthy and happy and fill in. So obviously, the soil that we were starting with had just been ravaged by construction. So of course, the first step was to deal with the compaction and add back, organic material. So in the mid-Atlantic, we have to have good organic matter content, to have happy gardens, because our natural soils are really geared towards sustaining a forest. It's different in other places where you go to the desert, you have different habitats that need different things, but really this area was meant to sustain forests. So that's why we're always talking about here about adding organic matter to the soil. So, and just soils in general, that are high in organic matter, they retain more moisture, they have a crumbly texture that resists soil compaction, and they contain a reservoir of nutrients that slowly are released over time. So organic matter improves soil aeration, water drainage, root growth, and biological activity. So the University of Maryland says that there's about 1 billion microorganisms in a teaspoon of compost or soil. So just completely amazing. And we don't even really have a great understanding of how it works together. There's just so much to learn. But back on the subject, so we had a contractor come in, with a small excavator and break everything up. And then we added 3 truckloads of pine fines as a soil conditioner to mix in, and then topped it off with like 3 truckloads of compost topsoil mix. So that's kind of what it looked like. And, and this is a part that's really exciting to me. You can tell the excitement of Andrew when he talks about the orchids, or Drew, about the matrix and all of that. And I'm going to just touch on that in a little bit. But, plants are just so amazing, and we all get so excited about it. So this part, like, we really couldn't move on from this project until we had a final building inspection. The part we had already done was considered part of the construction, and really what we needed to do to pass the final inspection was to have any disturbed soil covered, so there weren't any erosion concerns. So, most of the time that means throwing down grass seed. But of course, we certainly didn't want to put down any kind of perennial seed because we wanted to plant again just in September or the end of August. And any kind of perennial seed would have meant, spraying some kind of herbicide. And we certainly did not want to be doing that. So there is annual grass seed that we could have used, but I just felt that there really could have been something better that we could look into. So I started looking around for other kinds of cover crops, and a nurseryman that I know pointed me into the direction of the green cover seed company, green cover seed company out of the Midwest. So they know a lot about cover crops, and I was able to order a seed mix that not only grew fast and controlled erosion, but it could just be mowed down when we were ready to plant, and it wouldn't resprout. So the roots of the not resprouting and being able to keep the roots there really ensured that it would hold the soil, and so we wouldn't have even erosion problems or concerns when we were planting. So then also the tops, we could all chop down, and then that would be like added organic material to the bed. So I ordered a seed mix from them, and it had 12 different species of annual plants. And what got me excited, like I said earlier, was to learn about all the benefits of that these amazing plants had to offer to the space. So this is what the seed mix included. There was 4 different legumes. Legumes provide nitrogen to the soil and attract beneficial insects. And man, did they. You can see in that far left picture in the bottom corner, we had tons of ladybugs. It was really just amazing. So grasses like millet and sorghum, help to suppress weeds, because, we want the stuff we seeded into to come up. We didn't want all, anything else, germinating in there. So again, they all help to suppress the weeds, and they just add a lot of biomass. So like we knew when we were cutting down, we were going to add some good stuff again to the soil. So the brassicas are plants from the mustard family. You think in terms of like cabbage and radish and turnips, again, offer weed suppression and continue to break up compaction too, with their strong roots. And then the last category, the broadleaf plants, mobilize nutrients in the soil. They suppress weeds and attract pollinators too. So as you can see then on the left at the top, it filled in really quickly, and another thing about all of that is all those roots of all those plants were making habitat for all the microscopic life in the soil, that we were trying to build back. So it really did everything we wanted and more. So we passed inspection of the garden. And then really when we were starting to install, phase 2, like I said, we just mowed it down as we went along. And then too, we had to add the hardscape again with a second part in phase 2. And then we could start to actually plant. So we'll look at So this was the finished hardscape. You know, the stones are dry laid again, to let water to penetrate better. And then the center of the patio in the phase 2 is again more of the porous pave. So this is a kind of a crazy photo pieced together, but it really is to give you the perspective of what it feels like to be in that patio area and look back on the garden. This fall, it was just beautiful, like looking back into the woods, you know, with all the trees and the colored foliage. It was just really great. I can't say how many times I think about what a great asset this garden's going to be to Hillwood. So the whole planting project included 4,164 plants. It's 81 different species, 100% native to the US, 86% native to the mid-Atlantic. So if you'd like to know what state plants are native to, I would suggest looking at the Ladybird Johnson Wildflower Center at their database. It's really very good, and it'll tell you whatever states you know, a plant is native to. I use it quite a bit, and I think it's a lot of fun to see. So when we look at the project as a whole, you know, and we look back at our goals we had set, you know, to support sustainability, you know, I am really pleased about the whole thing. You know, we wanted a wide variety of natives. You know, having 81 different species in a space, you know, is very exciting to me. As for including plants from our own regional plant community, 86% native to the Mid-Atlantic. You know, replacing the tree canopy. You know, we added 22 trees to that small place. It's really only about 1/3 of an acre. So, you know, really, really good. So then, you know, what about maximizing habitat? And again, like Drew said, this is where plant choice and layering the garden are so important. You know, it was great to see. I hadn't seen his presentation before, but it was really exciting to see the plants that he was mentioning in his slides, you know, and have it correspond to plants we have down in the garden. We did add oaks, and again, you know, oaks support hundreds of caterpillar species. Even the tulip trees, you know, that is a big plant, a big forest plant here in this area that's native. You know, they produce such large quantities of nectar for pollinating insects that's why one of the reasons why they're just so important too in the landscape, because you know they support, you know, bees and flies and beetles and even hummingbirds when they flower. Also in our planting down there, there's a strong shrub layer as well, and you know, and that includes blueberries. So you know, again, doing what we can to support a habitat. Of course, that's exactly what we wanted to do. You know, and then lots of perennials. That means habitat for insects that then again feed the birds. And all of this, it was so important to work on the soil health. So all these shrubs and trees and perennials all knit together and make that a whole ecosystem. So we'll put a big check on maximizing habitat. Again, not requiring much irrigation, but then when we started to talk about this realistically, in the end, it really might need some beyond even, you know, the first, when we're trying to get the plants established. You know, again, why that might be is because, you know, we're planting in a biopond, but sometimes we go through some really dry periods. You know, what happens then? You know, we planted that with the idea of, you know, what would survive the wet. But it's really hard to ask a plant to live in, you know, live in the wet and then also then survive a drought. You know, the thing is about natives is they do often, require less water, but, we can't ask the world of them. So I do think in a dry spell, we may have to put some water in that bioretention pot. So maybe that was one thing that we'll just keep in mind. So, and then the last thing is, again, about the traditional mulching. That's certainly something we didn't want to do. But again, just like Drew said, that is, using the matrix and letting all the plants do the work. Because, why is mulch used most of the time? It's to keep down the weeds. But again, like I said, if we rely on the plants to fill in and work together, then we don't need the mulch. The plants will do the work. So again, like I said, that was why it was important to work on soil health, so the plants are healthy enough to do the job. And again, that's why the ground covers were really laid out in pretty high quantities, and we'll keep adding that to make sure we get the fill that we need. And realistically, there's never going to be no weeds, but it will be manageable enough that we can do it without the use of additional mulch and additional inputs like that. So that was for the Collections and Research Center garden. So we'll move on to some other initiatives in horticulture now. So another important part of the strategic plan is to be better stewards to our woodlands. Our woodlands account for nearly half of our property. It creates a great buffer between our neighbors, and in the back, we're part of Soapstone Valley, which, all belongs to Rock Creek Park. So our big problem is invasive plant species. So over the years, ivy and burning bush have escaped, the gardens and carpeted the woodlands. Invasive plant species, crowd out natives and create a monoculture, disrupting the entire ecosystem. So we have talked for a long time about how to address this. And I will be honest, when I stand out there, and some of the people on staff know that, when I stand out there and look at how much ivy there is and how it's covered everything, it just becomes really overwhelming. But I will give so much credit to Drew Asbury and Matt Boyle, one of our gardeners, that they have really set everything in motion. Drew had been thinking about how to get more hands involved, and he came up with the idea of the Volunteer Woodland Stewardship Program. So, in this role, volunteers are led by either Drew or Matt once a week to remove English ivy out in the woodlands. So they started with an area between the Dacha and the Adirondack, and the progress already has just been really great. Besides that, too, Matt has led some staff work days. These focus on some of the more difficult areas, cutting ivy off the trees in the back where there's some really steep slopes. And then also we're working on clearing a swath between our fence and back in farther, so we create a little barrier to the park. So we've just met, we just had a meeting last week or the week before, time all blends together for some reason. And we had a great meeting with the Rock Creek Conservancy, and we're really excited to partner with them and apply their knowledge to our situation. So a part of that, swath is to really become, good neighbors and keep any more things from going right into the park, because really it's very little. There's only a little bit of plants coming from the park into Hillwood. It's really Hillwood adding to problems in Rock Creek. So I'll just be clear about that. And we don't want that to continue. We want to be good neighbors, and we want to be good stewards of our woodlands and Rock Creek Park. So for more information on invasive plants in Rock Creek Park, Drew is going to put a little link in the chat, and you can find more information there. So composting. So our composting program continues to expand. So you're all aware that we compost almost, all our herbaceous material. Sticks are taken away and ground into mulch that's then used by throughout the county. In Maryland, it actually goes to a recycling place in Maryland where then they use it for, I've heard, a lot of state uses. So, but really, what we've really expanded is our vegetable scrap composting. And we still do. We don't have a whole lot anymore because it doesn't include volunteers and everything, but we do compost vegetable scraps just from our break room, from what we have for lunch or things like that. But again, we're going to expand that. We have expanded that to actually use all the vegetable scraps from the Meriwether Cafe. So these scraps, they're either fed to our worms because they're hungry little creatures, or it's just anything extra gets composted in our compost pile. So we are also composting all the coffee grounds from the entire campus, including the cafe. And I don't know if you know, but there's a lot of coffee drank here at this museum. And it's really good actually to put it into the compost and keep it from going into the landfill. The Oregon State University finds that, that coffee grounds are really a good source of nitrogen for the compost and encourage the growth of microscopic organisms. So vegetable scraps and coffee grounds, they naturally break down and return to the soil. So when we send them to the landfill, the EPA states that similar to tying food in a plastic bag, the scraps rot and produce methane gas. So the nutrients in the food never returns to the soil, which is really a shame. And it's like part of the whole what life is, returning to the soil, springing from the soil and returning to it. So, I would encourage everybody to think about composting at home to keep these things out of the landfill. And we will certainly be thinking about what we can compost next. So I thought this was something important to talk about too. Hillwood invests thousands of dollars every year on beneficial insects as our primary means of insect control in the greenhouse. I'll say from personal experience that it is not fun to put on a pesticide suit, a personal protection suit, and spray unhealthy chemicals in a hot enclosed environment like the greenhouse. It's just not a good experience. So not only do beneficial insects save us from that, but they also save us time because they work 24 hours a day. Jarrett, again, a little plug for him again. So what he can do when the beneficials are working is he can just focus on hot spots of insect activity instead of blanket spraying, the entire house. So you may have heard of us talk about Aphidius colmani. So that is what we like to use to control aphids. It's a native North American parasitic wasp. But what you may not know is that we have a whole army of different beneficial insects to combat certain problems. So Western flower thrips, those are sucking insects that really damage leaves and flowers. They're particularly a problem when you have to have flowers look good, like we do for arrangements, or if you want them to last a long time, like we want the orchids to last, through as long as possible through orchid month and just throughout the year. So there's actually a predatory mite that can feed on this pest. So if you look at the bottom, and that is the Herbaceous, I'm going to butcher that because I cannot say that right, cucumaris. So that's actually this predatory mite feeding on one of these Western flower thrips. So then also there's another predatory mite, the Phytocoelius persimilis, and that feeds on spider mites. So again, spider mites breakouts can be a problem in the greenhouse because they can stunt the plant growth and just don't allow them to perform. And when you're dealing in a greenhouse with reduced space, you really count on every plant that you need. So again, that is a really neat mite that really can work on taking out a two-spotted mite population. So that's actually the persimilis is actually feeding on some two-spotted mite eggs in that center photo. So then another beneficial insect we use, and one that we just bought in recently too, is the Chrysoperla rufilivus, sorry. But actually, so that's just the green lacewing. So the larval stage is a voracious predator. You can see it, the larva stage is that small thing that's like a caterpillar with legs, but it's not, it's all an insect. But it really has been documented to eat 60 aphids an hour. So it can really go through and take care of a pretty heavy infestation. So, and all of these beneficial insects are pretty standard in a biological maintenance program. And they all do a pretty good job. But like I said, that just keeps Drew and Jarrett from having to, do some blanket spraying. And then really time can just be taken to monitor for larger outbreaks. And then we have environmentally friendly products made out of plant oils and extracts to kind of deal with any hot spots. So another important part of our strategic plan is our conversion to electric equipment. So DC passed a law that has prohibited the use of gas-powered leaf blowers, and that's just started January 1st of this year. Although that noise, of course, is an important factor, really studies have shown that two-cycle equipment like the blowers really produce a lot of air pollution. So two-cycle equipment doesn't have, an internal lubrication system. So the operator, adds oil to the gas to use it. And it's this burning of this oil gas mixture that really creates the added air pollution. And also, it comes in more packaging, comes in plastic bottles, and then also chance for spills when you're mixing and using, filling up containers and doing different things with it. So really, what we really want to do in horticulture is just phase out all of our two-cycle equipment. So beyond replacing the blowers this year, we've also replaced all our string trimmers. So those are the two most used pieces of two-cycle equipment that here in our kind of inventory. And then for the next year, we're kind of looking at electric hedge trimmers, chainsaws, and leaf vacuums, which then would cover, all of our two-cycle equipment and get rid of that for good. That would be super exciting. So that's on the horizon, but this year transitions both blowers and weed eaters to electric. So plastics are also a problem in the horticulture industry. 95% of all plastic pots, it's thought end up in the landfill. So, here at Hillwood, we're thinking about how to reduce our plastic pot usage. Drew has ordered some fiber pots for trial for growing plants for the cutting garden. And then, we'll see how they function. And there's several different types. So we're just going to see how that goes. But that, eventually will reduce the pots that are used for our own growing here. But then a lot of our plastic pots comes when we order in plant material, for things like our seasonal display. So really, Drew has really taken a lead role on that, and he was talking to our different vendors, and he got one of them to take the plastic pots back, because really this is the idea is that then they're going to wash them and reuse them. So it's really a challenge in our industry that there's really not a whole lot of alternatives to plastic right now. So the APLD, the Association of Professional Landscape Designers, are really trying to change that. And Drew is a member of that organization. So they're really trying to educate consumers and actually gather signatures to show manufacturers that this is important to people and that things need to change. So, that just goes together with what our thinking is here. And Drew's going to put a link to their information in the chat for that as well. And I hope you guys can take a look and see where you can support that. Because as consumers, that's where, we make change. But it's also, on the other hand, it's hard to make change when the right products aren't available. So it's always an interesting situation, and it's the kind of same situation that we're dealing with the electric equipment. This is something we want to do, but it's just difficult because not all the technology is there. Not everything is in place for it to be an easy transition. But maybe that's the same for any problem in life, and as you try to move forward and make positive changes. So we're going to move on to facilities. Our facilities department is amazing. So they have been working hard on their own sustainable initiatives. They are led by Brian Greenfield, who is the senior head of engineering and sustainability. So one of their big agenda items over the last few years has been energy savings. So and their first focus was the HVAC system for many of the buildings on campus. It's located right near our garage. If you ever wonder why people go in and out those double doors in the back of our garage, well, that's because the whole HVAC system is in there. So it contains, the boilers for the heating and chillers for cooling. And that equipment was installed in the late 90s. So not only were they getting to the end of their lifespan, but they were not very energy efficient. So Hillwood invested money in upgrading the system, and that has resulted in a 30% efficiency increase. So, and that translates to both electric and natural gas savings. So Brian is very diligent, and he's always looking for energy savings. He's looking to turn down the heat where he can, and all of that stuff. So, but no matter what, we're always going to use a little bit, at least at this point, of public utilities. So what he did, with everyone's blessing, of course, and I just want to say that really Kate and the board are really on board with these sustainability initiatives. We couldn't do any of the stuff that we're doing really without their support. But what he did was that he was able to move us to 100% sustainable power, and we became an EPA green power partner. Also under Brian's direction, we bought carbon offsets to cover the natural gas that we use. So these two actions, you can see there on the slide, have really reduced our carbon footprint by quite a lot, over 2 million pounds. So that's really a great step for Hillwood in our fight against climate change. And then lastly, you know, like any public institution, Hillwood has a lot of lighting. So facilities have made a push to change out the bulbs in a lot of places, including all the office spaces, and changing all over to LED. The curatorial department has also joined in and are working to change over bulbs in the mansion. I believe this year they're targeting exposed bulbs and fixtures. And then they're talking about changing out the lightings in the cases maybe for 2023. And so I just wanted to say too that you will see that really this has become it's become a campus-wide thing. So, you know, all these, what we spent years of having like these separate initiatives in one department or other. So now we become a whole committee that gets together to discuss sustainability throughout the whole campus. And we have representatives from each department. And this has just been a wonderful thing. So what we do is, you know, we bring our own environmental thoughts to these meetings. So we're called HEAT. It's Hillwood's Environmental Action Team. And really a great thing about this is that not only you get people together with different ideas who work in different jobs, but I'll tell you something, it really holds you accountable and really pushes these ideas forward. But like I said, it's just a really very exciting time to work here and to work with this group and really have people from all over campus who are excited to see sustainability measures really take a foothold. So I did want to just point out too that, you know, Brian has really been, you know, really done a great job in running these meetings. He's kind of like the chairman of our team. And one of the things that he was able to do is he was reaching out. He's actually a representative for the FIPS Climate Toolkit. And they actually did a little article on our meeting, on our team. So, you know, again, you know, getting some of that word out and really, hopefully we want to inspire other organizations that maybe who haven't taken this step to do that. So again, I'm going to count on Drew to put another link in the chat, and then you can take a look at your leisure at that article. So as you know, we had the idea to set campus-wide goals every year. So this year, we're going to try to reduce our water usage by 100,000 gallons or roughly 4%. So the idea, you know, with campus-wide goals is that everyone has the opportunity to participate, you know, even our volunteers. You know, over the last couple of years, facilities has been installing a lot of water meters to like pinpoint water usage. So Brian's going to be sharing data from each building with the staff and giving updates to volunteers to see where each of us can make a difference. You know, at the very least, I think it's going to make us more mindful of the water that we use. And also then we will have, you know, having this campus-wide goal and having this committee also keeps us open to hear anybody's ideas about water-saving measures. So Brian and I have also been talking about rainwater collection, in particular for the greenhouse and the HVAC systems. You know, both of these areas do use quite a bit of water. So we are still, you know, figuring out some of the logistics of this and how it all work. And I will certainly keep you posted about how this all progresses. And I'm going to go back just 1 minute too and just give Brian a big shout out. He really is a leader with the team, and he's really a leader actually in sustainability in the facility management field. And again, like I said earlier, he's really good about getting the word out about Hillwood's achievements. So as an example, you know, he was highlighted this year in a newsletter by the local chapter of the International Facilities Management Association. So he's really doing a great job, and I'm really happy I get to work with him. So. Another facilities-driven initiative is recycling, actually beyond the normal single-stream recycling provided, you know, here in the city. That's kind of normal. Hillwood recycles like all sorts of things: cork for wine bottles, batteries, light bulbs. The administration team is working on things like pens and highlighters and glue sticks and things like that, all ways to keep these items out of the landfill. There have been so many other, you know, kind of interdepartmental initiatives. You all know our visitor tags. Well, I am happy to announce that through a push from marketing and visitor services, you know, we'll be changing those to a biodegradable sticker. And this will really reduce litter throughout the campus. So many times they fall off. And then, yeah, having a biodegradable sticker is just is fantastic. Also, I don't know if you've seen this or noticed this before, but we do have a water bottle refilling station in the visitor center to reduce, you know, the packaging of water. And then Sabine, our associate collections manager, she actually turned us on to glove recycling. See, it's everybody now getting involved to making progress. Monica Tucker, the head of payroll and benefits, and Brooklyn Grossard, she's our administrative assistant. They've all been working together on sustainable office supplies. And Brooklyn even wrote an article. You might have seen it from an email from Lisa. She's the one that wrote the tips to have a more environmentally friendly holiday season. So almost all of this was spurred through conversations related to heat. So. Last but not least, you know, spreading the word. You know, we do, you know, we all know what we're doing, but, you know, really very few of our visitors have really an idea of that. So again, you know, this is the thing that makes heat so powerful, because, you know, one of our members is Elizabeth Axelson. So she's our marketing, communications, and digital engagement manager. So she stepped in and not only posts about sustainability on our different social media platforms like Instagram, but then she developed an entire sustainability page on the website. So, you know, it's small things like that, working together. You know, I do this, and how can I, you know, take this sustainability measure to another level, you know, with my knowledge. It's really, you know, it's really amazing to see that happen in the team. So then this year, with the support of the interpretation team, we're going to be hosting our first in-person Earth Day celebration. So we're going to have manned informational tables out on the lunar lawn, and I'm going to be giving tours at the Collections and Research Center garden. And so, you know, another way to get out, you know, get the word out that, you know, this is important to us. Also, you know, we're spreading the word with talks and lectures. Drew has been presenting to a lot of garden clubs over the last year about sustainable gardening practices. He had a lot of people interested after the Flowers in February series that he did. I'm sure that once people start hearing about his caterpillar talk, they're going to be wanting him to do that as well. So, it's just great exposure for Hillwood. This year, I'm going to have the opportunity to speak at the American Public Garden Association's National Conference in June, which I'm very excited about. I'm going to be discussing historical gardens and sustainability. Just getting our name out there as much as possible on a national level, and being part two of things like the FIPS Climate Toolkit. For those that don't know, FIPS Conservatory and Botanical Gardens is like a huge, is like where it is in sustainability movement. They are all about educating the public on climate change. They're like the top resource of that on the East Coast. So, we are also a part of their climate toolkit, and it's getting our message out to a broader audience, and hopefully initiating improvements in the world that we live in, and taking care of Mother Nature, who we all love so much. So and with that is what I had for you today. So I'm gonna stop sharing and see if there's any questions out there for me.
Oh, there's plenty of questions, Jessica, but yeah,
Okay.
bravo. That was a lovely, inspiring presentation. So yeah, it's exciting to see it all come together, all our little initiatives, right? Because that's what it's about. Every little bit helps and creates a bigger picture. So, but we do have quite a few great comments and some questions for you. So Sharon, I think way back when you were talking about the new Native Garden Collections and Research Center, she asked, what's the purpose of the different matrix groups? Is it different growing requirements, visual diversity, ecological? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would think, so it's really to, just increase biodiversity, right? We want to have lots of different plants, and they all have different functions. So that's why you have lots of different matrices. So you are creating little different habitats and allowing, different insects or whatever to populate one particular plant if they like it. So.
I'll add it. I think it's pretty too. It's pretty.
And it's, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It's pretty too.
That comes out. Carol asked, does the porous hardscape in the garden area support accessibility goals and standards?
So it is, if you are asking about like if it's handicap accessible, absolutely, yes. They were looking at slopes and it has handrails, so yes, that area should that area is accessible for everybody. It has an elevator that you can take down, so and back up, so yes.
We had a general comment that was mentioned that DC has a compost drop point at at one farmer's market in every ward. So just general knowledge out there. There are places to take your compost.
Awesome.
Andrew piped in when you were talking about the beneficials that green lacewings eat just about everything, and I will concur with that.
That's correct.
Re-release as generalist predators. So and they kind of munch on everything. And then we have congratulations to the entire staff for initiating and implementing all these forward-thinking initiatives. So bravo, bravo, bravo to ourselves. No, just and any plan for switching from gas to electric for heating and cooling?
So, well, that's a good question. And I would have to touch more base with Brian about. But really, I think that the way we're going, they just installed all this equipment. So I think for now, until, well, the life cycle or other, technology improves, right now it's electric and natural gas.
Maybe we'll have a windmill someday. Who knows? Who knows in a
Well,
hundred?
I mean, what I'd like to chime in and say is that most of the appliances that were bought are extremely efficient comparative to what was originally there. So, I mean, that the usage of gas and electricity, whatever the heating element may be, is going to
And
be.
yeah, and who knows, we could use geothermal down the line. Who knows,
Hey, I do have another question for you, Jessica, but in line, there's a question for you, Andrew. Julie's asking, what's the average size of a vanilla orchid?
Hmm.
You got that monster behind you.
Let me counter the question. Are you referring to the pod or are you referring to the plant? That would be my first question to ask back and see what she says.
Well, I would argue that we have some small little specimens of vines in the greenhouse that are anywhere from 2 feet long to, we've had vines 20 feet long, right? It doesn't really branch too terribly often. It's a spindly, long,
It will
climbing.
branch, but the thought is that when I first started growing vanilla, back when I started growing orchids in general, it was like a 15 to 20 foot vine was the thought that that's what you needed to get flowers initiated. But as I will say this in a general term, orchids will not bloom in the first 10 years of their life. So
I thought you were going to say they don't follow
they're
the
still
rules.
considered juvenile. So yeah, it takes
mature
time, and it takes and then a really good mature bean is about 10 inches long, 8 to 10 inches long, and that's about what we call a grade A or the best quality vanilla as far as the spice is concerned.
Surely our bean was about 9 inches long. 9 inches.
Originally they start out like that, but when they grow, and then after the curing process, if they're still about 8 to 10 inches, is considered a good quality bean.
We had our director.
Can I
yes,
just
Jessica,
go
ahead.
back? Yeah, I'm gonna just go back to the question about using gas and electric. But yeah, so part of the thinking of what Brian was when he wanted to go to 100% renewable resources is kind of offset that, and that's why we're buying carbon offsets to kind of make up for using the natural resources that everybody
is what the
is using.
machinery will do, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it looks like our last question, Jessica, unless something else pops up, it's from Kathy. It says, is Hillwood considering using yellow bulbs instead of bright white and motion detector lighting, as she understands through Doug Talamy, another Doug Talamy fan, that we are killing insects with our outdoor lighting? And I have heard that as well, that same idea.
Well, that is very interesting, and that will be something that we will take to heat and discuss.
I knew you were going to say that, Jessica. I knew that.
But thank you. I want to just thank you for bringing that up. So yes, that should be stuff that's keep the conversation going for that. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, everyone, that unfortunately that wraps up our day today. So on the behalf of Jessica and Andrew and myself, we want to thank you so much for supporting us today. We hope you enjoyed our event, and surely be checking your emails for that next round in a month from now. We'll do this all over again. So in the meantime, everyone, enjoy your afternoon and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.